Can you begin?
Sun is bright. What I just handed out is the forecast that the Finance Committee looks at quite a bit. And I really want to just direct your attention to the top. Remember, beginning went up to 10%. We had forecasted a need for around 20-25% for the full year. And we also talked about putting those in stages, right? Stepping those in. So 10% came in the beginning of this year, February through June. What we've got here is 25, that number 25% is actually indicative of having something in place from July to the end of the year in one number. And there's multiple options, and I think Scott's going to go through some of those. What this does, this top box that's in gray, it shows you the beginning cash reserves from 2023 actual. The next column over says 2024 estimate. That's actually actuals. So we're ending the year pre-audit with reserves at around 655,000. At the time we were discussing 2024, in 2024, that number was lower. I think our forecast was in the $400,000-$500,000 range, if not a little bit lower. So we actually came in a little better. In 23 actual, the $1.5 million surplus was actually a lease that we used to reimburse ourselves for the generator cost. And then that negative in 2024 is the expenses going out the same way. So in 2025 estimate right now, my estimate on 25% gives us an ending cash balance around 345,000. I think that's probably on the low side, given everything that's included. And then the next 2 years, which are really an estimate, we're really talking here tonight, talking about 2025, but 26 and 27, we try to look out in the out years. The goal here was trying to get to our policy, fund balance policy, which is 15% of expenses by that 2027 date. It's still achievable, it just depends on how we step those in, right? The numbers below is, I can go through those and bore you to tears, but for actual and then estimates for 25. The only difference in 25 estimate and then the budget is we brought the purchase power down to the actual expenses from 24, and I put that in the 25 column. So the losses get better until we start having a surplus. I think Scott's going to probably show you something similar within 26 to 27. And all of our utilities, I believe, have an escalator, not escalator, but a annual increase rate of CPI of some type. Any questions on what we've got here? I know the Finance Committee has seen this before. If not, I think Scott's got more information.
Yeah, I think we'll let probably Scott present, and then
Yeah,
I'm sure we'll have questions for you.
I usually create way more questions than I answer.
Me too.
Oh, we know.
It's not a good thing. So we have looked at this quite a bit, and you guys have been obviously very involved in setting the rates. We had the workshop last year. We talked about, not going to fully assign a rate that would get us to meet our expenses. We wanted to see what happened first half, and then we would do something in July that would then get us to where we think our expenses are going to be. And so this whole conversation today really is, and what we hope to come out of here as a finance budget committee is some feedback from the council on where we want to end up with a cash reserve in this fund, right? Because that number will really dictate what the rate needs to be. And we'll see here how it's going to vary dramatically, whatever rate you pick. So as we go through this, we'll kind of look at that, but then we need to have a conversation around what what your guidance is, because in the end we're gonna vote on it on a rate increase that will either get us to a number or not, right? So be thinking about that the whole time. So we've seen this breakdown before. This is how we talked about it last year. Hopefully it makes it clearer about and transparent about where our expenses are going. So if you look at first of all, talk about the assumptions for 25. um, One of the things you have to assume is how many kilowatt hours you're going to buy and sell, right? So that's the first number you have to pick. And KMEA and Jeff and Ben, they go through the whole process and estimate what that is based on history and those types of things. So that number is 38 million kilowatt hours, roughly. Um, and then our expense budget that we approved for 2025 last year is 6 million, a little over 6 million for this fund. Um, and we'll talk about the reserve fund catch up in a minute. But if you look at the rates, that's what's most important. If you look at the 2025 rates, and we need to talk about what a net rate is. So if you look at what's in the ordinance, it's both a per kilowatt hour rate that varies by your classification, whether you're a resident, whether you're a business, but then also in there a meter fee, right? So those are all lumped together in the revenue. So you can't go by just what the kilowatt hour rate is. You said it's the meter fee in there as well. It's all that combined together divided by the number of kilowatt hours. So when we talk about net rate, that's all that revenue combined divided by the kilowatt hours, right? And that's so in 24, the way we ended up, and again, we'll continue to vet these with Ben and Jeff in the Budget and Finance Committee. But if you take out the franchise fee, a 6% franchise fee, as you know, we charge that franchise fee on every utility, whether they're ours or an external company. That 6% franchise fee comes in as revenue. It's a line item on your bill. If you look at your bill, there's an EL and a franchise fee. So that comes in under the electric utility, but then it is transferred in the same month to the general fund. So the electric utility doesn't get to use that. It's basically just a vehicle to transfer to the general fund. So I pulled those out of the expense in the revenue, right? Because they cancel themselves out. So those are not in these rates. They're not in the budget. They're not in the revenues. But you can see we're at 13.330 net rate for 24. That's where we ended up for the whole year. That was the average rate. And you can see our actual starting rate this year was 0.539, so 15% higher. Again, not just the rate increase, but it's the meter fees added into that as well. That's where you get that net. But we'll see in a second how it's not sufficient enough to meet this expense stack chart. So really just what we're showing here is how much of your expense is going to debt, principal and interest, how much is going to our distribution organization, electric distribution, how much is going to electric production, which Jeff leads, and then how much goes to our administrative organization, or fees, basically. And then the bottom one is how much wholesale purchase power that we plan to buy for the year. Now, this is based on contracts. As you all know, we approved GRDA and those others, so we know what we're contractually on the hook for, and there's a percentage of that we do on the day ahead market. So it's not set in stone. And then you also know that there's a power cost adjustment, that if they have increased power costs, they pass that on to us. So it's not a fixed number. It's our best guess on what we think we're gonna buy and sell. Any questions on that? It's really just breaking out our expense budget. So how does that break out then to the needed net rate to meet that 6.081 million in expenses? And this is just a view of what it needs to be. So if you look at the top number, we should be charging 0.655 in a net rate. And if you remember back, we're charging 0.539. So there's a gap. But you can also see where that, if you look at down the bottom of the right chart, there's nothing that we're adding in there above the expenses for reserve. So reserve's gonna be whatever it is at this point. So 0.025 is for debt, principal, and interest. 0.073 is for our operations expenses, and 0.068 is for wholesale purchase power. Now that includes actually that 10% markup, because if you remember in our discussions that we buy $2.34 million worth of power, but there's losses that we incur. There's things that we light up that we don't charge for. So the only way we can get back to that 2.344 is if we upcharge what we do sell. It'll be something less than, it'll be 2.1 million. We have to upcharge our rate to get back to that 2.3. That makes any sense. So we upcharge 11% because we have 10% in losses. Okay. Questions? All right. So we're going to look at the revenue forecast. I'm going to build this out because it's a busy chart in the end and it'd be hard to talk to with all the lines on it. But really what we're going to look at is expense budget and forecast and our revenue budget and forecast. So, and this is by month. So if you just took our 6.08 million and divided it by 12 months, you get a little over 500,000 a month is what our expense budget is. Then if you look at what our revenue forecast is based on that 0.153, you can see there's a gap, right? So we will obviously, if that holds true, we don't do anything about it, we won't end up with enough revenue to meet the expenses. Now, if we had reserve, the reserve, and what happens is we start eating reserve. And that's what Ben was alluding to is if you don't raise the rates, the reserve is currently about 400,000. It's going to go lower and lower and potentially negative, which you really can't do in a utility for the city. So you have to watch that. You have to make sure you end up with enough revenue to cover your expenses, including reserve. You can use a reserve, but if you really can't go negative, and then you have to borrow it from the general somewhere else and pay it back later. It gets messy. So what we're showing here is this is by month what our expenses would look like. First 4 months through April are actuals. And the reason there's a spike in February, I think there's a big debt payment. They aren't smooth. There's chunks, so I think there's a big debt payment in February. But you can see here that it varies by month, and obviously our expenses in the middle there are highest during the summer months. So then you add in what our revenue forecast to be, and this is again using the 0.539 rate that we set the rate at. You can see it too fluctuates about the same, but you can see we're always below the expense line, right? We're never really catching up, so we're going to end up with that gap at the end if things hold the way we forecast it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So what do we need to do? What we're here talking about today is that rate increase in July. We all thought we knew we were going to need to do. We talked about this in December. So that blue line obviously follows that green dotted line for the first 6 months because it's the actuals or it's whatever it's going to be. And that revenue is what we're going to need to generate to get to that expense line of 6.08 million, right? So what that obviously means is we need to have some type of rate increase at that time. Just another way to look at it is this is the cumulative view. You can see there's the red dotted line is the expense line cumulative, and the green dotted line is the revenue dotted line. You can see the new blue dotted line would be what we would do in July with a new rate, and then it would then end up meeting, the red line up at the top right at 6.08 million. So you can see that just based on our rate and our expenses, we're looking at $600 some thousand shortfall that we knew we were going to have. And just some of the numbers down in the lower right, just some of the percentages comparing, where we needed to be. That 0.665 is where we need to be or needed to be starting the year. And the 0.1539 is where we did start the year from a net rate perspective. And those just look at comparisons to 2024. So you look at, if we increase again in 23, and this is where Ben and I are, we got to look at our numbers. We vary. Another 13% is needed to get us to the 6 million expenses, and that would equate to about a 30% increase year over year. It was kind of what we were talking about at the end of last year. We thought might be the case. So, questions on that? Hopefully, that kind of explains what's going on and why we're having this conversation. Can't be that everybody's asleep. All right, so let's talk about the cash reserve. So we do have a policy, and this gets talked about a lot at Budget and Finance. You look here at what our policy is. It's 15% of expenses. Now, there's two types of expenses, right? There's the entire expense budget, the 6 million, and then there's operations in debt, because if you pull out, the only thing left operations debt is the purchase power, right? You pull that out. The reason I did pull it out, and we talk about a lot, we probably need to, if we do look at it this way, probably need to change the ordinance. But we heard from KMEA that purchase power contracts aren't a liability. If you lose all your transmission lines or your ability to produce, you can't generate any revenue. You can't sell any revenue, right? Because your lines are down. It would be the worst case scenario. We're still on the hook to pay those contracts, right? We don't get to say we didn't use any. We're not paying you what we have to pay that. But if you remember, what they talked about is we can just sell that on the open market, right? So we can actually go to the market with our purchase power and sell it. Now, will we get what we paid for it? Don't know. But assuming we can, and if we can, it will be 10, 15% less. So it's not a huge miss. So do you really need to take a reserve to operate, to function, if you can't have any revenue on something that's going to support itself, right? So those are the things we talk about. I think the standard, Ben works with a lot of cities, and the standards is you just take your total expense budget and you do 25%, and that's kind of the norm. But that's a big number, and that's money that we're asking our citizens to pay that doesn't sit in their bank account, sits in ours, right? And so as a council, we need to think about how, what is the risk, how much risk we want to take, and, how aggressive do we want to be on that reserve number? All right. So any questions on that? So those are 15%. Again, that's ops and debt. So that's about, what was that? Let me go back. So that number is it's everything but debt. So it's 6.08 million minus the 2.3. So
3.7.
Yeah. 3.7, 3.8, something like that.
So in the scenario where we remove the expenses as a part of the 15% to 25% policy,
Which expenses?
Cost of the power.
the cost of the power.
Yeah, okay.
So if that's removed, when we go out for a bond rating, do they consider that 15%? I don't remember.
That's a question for Ben. They don't let us sit in those bond meetings.
So when they do a bond rating, so in the scenario where we pull out the cost of power with the assumption that we could sell it, they wouldn't go into that detail. Okay. Okay. Right.
If you got a policy, stick to your policy. If you can't stick to your policy, then it becomes a negative.
Got it. So
They don't go into the detail of what our reserve is based on, is what you're saying. Okay.
So they don't do the math on.
They won't do the math on operations versus debt or
Okay.
anything like that. They'll just ask, "What's your policy?"
Okay.
And then
Are you meeting it? which direction you headed.
Right. They want to see
Not
your,
meeting it, then how quick?
make sure you're not going lower. Right. Right.
Okay.
Good. Okay.
What's the plan? No, they do take that and compare it to others that's within their,
Comps.
yeah,
Yeah.
other cities within your same rating.
So it sounds like we're okay. We may need to, I don't know if we need to look at the ordinance and make it more detailed, or we just leave it wide open for any council to determine what their policy is based on. It could be the whole expense budget, or it could be a fraction of it like we're looking at.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think just so long as it's either trending up or neutral.
Right. That makes sense. So these are the numbers to our minimum policy is, 560, about 600K, 600,000, and the 25% top of the policy is not a little over 900,000. So really, to Ben's point, we need to be in there to meet a policy somewhere in there in those brackets, or have a plan to get there in the next year or two. Okay. So this is really, I think, the last one. So really, what we're looking at here, and this is where we got to do some more scrubbing. I think Ben showed 300 some thousand ending, and what I'm showing here on the purple line also matches the blue line in the first half because we're using actual, so they're the same. If we don't change the rates at all, you can see what the reserve would end up at. Obviously not acceptable. So we do need to make a rate change. If we make the rate change that I think we need to make, we talk about, it needs to be, I think it was point, did I list that on here? I may have left that out.
One through a few pages. Yep.
0.738 was the rate that drives this blue line. And that's about a 12-13% increase from our actuals the first half. It would, end up being about a 30% cumulative increase over 2024 ending net. So if you take that number as a net and you put it in and forecast again how many kilowatt hours we plan to use in the second half, we can kind of look at 24 and see what that would look like related to the 38 million, and then see what our expenses are forecast to be. I think we can get above the line with that rate. Now we need to go back in, and vet that with Ben and make sure we're all in agreement that makes sense. The question in discussion, I think, for the council is where do you want to end this year? And we could end wherever you want, 66K or $1 million. And where did we end up last year, Ben? And we ended up at
600.
655. So anything major below that would be a downward trend, to your point. Be probably questioned.
Good.
I think that was it. Hopefully that was helpful. It helps me understand when Ben's going through his numbers like that. I can think in a graph way.
You mean like you just did?
Yeah, exactly. What I just did.
So one thing I spoke to Ben about prior to this meeting, and I'm hearing from a lot of citizens that utilities are hurting right now. Everything's hurting right now. So I think as minimal of impact as, ultimately it's the council's vote, but as minimal impact as we can make it to our citizens, the best. So what I talked to Ben about, and he obviously doesn't have the information for that, and we'll discuss it in finance, but when we are trending negative in other utilities and other points, we stopped the 6% transfer to help that fund, so that way it wasn't such a drastic impact to our citizens. I would like to take a look at that and see what that would do to this reserve fund as well, because if we can afford to do it, and it's going to have an impact on our general fund for the rest of this year. I get that. But if we can do that, then it limits the impact to our citizens now, and we get more data by the end of the year to see what it really is, what actuals are really looking like. The other thing I'd like to look at is if there's any cuts for this year, any savings we can do, anything we can defer. I know staff, people don't like to hear that, but I think that if we're looking at an increase to our citizens on any level, we also have to look inwardly at what can we live without to help offset that cost to our citizens. So I'd like to take a look at those as well. To Scott's point, I mean, we have talked about the reserve fund quite extensively. Some people believe that we should have, the 15 to 25% of the total $6 million. I'm personally kind of in the boat that we should have 15 to 25% of what it would actually cost us to operate the city in a disaster, because I think that's more reality versus taking an arbitrary extra 15 to 20% off of another $2.3 million from our citizens. I mean, the other side to that is people are gonna, do we save up to pay with cash? But and then again, we're essentially taking money out of our citizens' pockets for a hypothetical expense that we may have in the future that we haven't even identified. So I have a problem with taking more money than we actually need to operate from our citizens. But so, anyways, that's my thoughts.
What are you guys thinking?
First of all, thank you, Scott. This is very helpful and
We'll send it all to you, by the way.
great.
The ink's still wet on it. That's why I didn't send it ahead of time.
Yeah, I agree with Casey. I think we need to try to minimize the impact to the citizens as much as possible. I've been hearing a lot lately about increased utility cost, and anything we can do. I think both the ideas that you just mentioned are great, and looking at where we can cut cost, I think would be ideal.
And we went through that exercise last fall, the same exercise, cutting everything. And I know I started chopping away at it, and it made Jeff almost throw up. So
I don't want to make Jeff throw up.
he had some things that I had to put back. I had to put back just because of the nature of the business.
Right.
But there are quite a bit of things that just have been removed. I don't know that that's going to glean a whole lot. We can obviously look at it again. That needs to be done every year anyway.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. One of the things we did do was take the purchase power budget, which was from looking at history, had been inflated some. So we took that down, significantly. From the 2024 cost, which is about what it's been for the last few years. I know we had took $500,000 out of that budget and dropped it down to the actual. Now I know PCA will cover some of that. If it goes up, then we've got a mechanism to recover some of that cost, right? Automatically. So really we are talking about operations at that point, just increases in operations. Most of your operations is going to be two things. Obviously personnel and any kind of increases in personnel across the board, and then any kind of equipment. And obviously you guys know when you buy a diesel generator for $800,000, it's not a small chunk of change. Luckily, you've got enough credit within the city banks to be able to lease that over time, which is what we did in 2023. And I know Jeff's already talked about the potential to get another one ahead of when the costs go skyrocket. So that's a possibility to plug in, but that we're talking about debt service at that point, not necessarily operations. And then to Casey's point on, in the past we've slowed down and then repaid admin fees, and the electric fund, that admin fees is around 200,000. That's equivalent to about 4 mills. You can slow that down. The general fund, unfortunately, is hurting. I say hurting. It's not going the right direction. So there's a limit to how much that can take place before you're really tasked with the other side of that coin. Is how do you deal with the revenue, the resources you have on that side. We do have all the information back from the departments, and I think you guys have heard most of what they had said they needed. We'll be putting a budget together in the next 2 weeks to give it to you on the 24th to really kind of comb through what's there for the general fund. I don't think either one of those are going to eliminate a need for an increase, a rate increase for the electric fund. I think you're right. We need to keep that as affordable as possible, but at the same time, balance that reserve question. When you talk to bankers or any kind of investment public, you're gonna get a fairly different number on reserve. The industries are in 180 days, which is 50%, not 15%. 15% a month in replacement, but again, they're not the ones answering to your constituents. You are. The one good thing about the rating agencies and the investment public, you guys issue bonds on a geo basis, not on a revenue
Correct.
basis, and for that very specific reason. Uh, they they're now looking at the entire city as a whole, regardless of what that revenue is. You may issue a geo bond, say for the community center, and it's just ad valorem back. Geo bond for the substation, a little different deal. They'll look at both ad valorem and the history of ad valorem, but also the revenue side. So they'll bring both of those into the equation and start talking about what the trends have looked like. Positives you've got right now is you've always been looking at replacing, getting that reserve up into a position that is within your policy. You've still got a plan within that 3-year window to hit that number. We told them that last year. It was a 4-year, we're in the 3-year window, and that's still there. It's just a matter of how do you get there, right? And keep it at the lowest number possible. That's a positive conversation. I don't think we're going out for bonds anymore.
So Ben, I know I asked you this in the finance committee. In 27, I think we have some bonds drop off from the electric fund. How much do we gain from that? Do you remember?
I do.
Don't you only have a year hiatus until the bonds for the?
It's around 400,000.
But what's the net revenue difference between the bond for the substation and the bond dropping off?
That's including that substation bond in there.
So it's 400,000 savings.
That's net, yeah.
Okay. So I guess for me,
The bond that's coming off was fairly high. That was
big one.
big debt.
yeah.
Right.
So then for me, it is how do we get through 26 to get to 27
Right, that's the
to
question.
give us that more revenue with the least impactful way to our citizens possible?
But I thought your 3-year forecast did have that difference in bond for
It does.
already plugged in.
I think that's why you saw 27 as a 1%.
Page I gave you has it.
Okay, yeah.
It's got it already. Because what the advantage of 27 is that 1% that you see there. That's part of the reason it's 1%.
Right.
Is because that bond drops off,
Right.
and that limits that. No, there's no capital in any of those 3 years. And I don't ask Jeff anything about capital because I don't want the answer.
I guess to your point, do we need to? So we're basically looking at, yeah. I mean, I guess that gets us to the top end of the policy by the end of 27.
Mm-hmm.
I always like to put it in real dollars to kind of give some context to, mostly for me, but for the citizens who aren't in these meetings every day and have a good, language for it. Let's say, I think when we have these 20% increase talks, 10% increase talks, people, they think of their whole bill. They say, oh my gosh, it's going to be 20% increase in my utility bill. But in Baldwin, since we own our own utilities, we don't send out an electric bill and then a water bill and then a sewer bill. It's all on one bill, and people, including myself, forget that you have to break those apart. And so when you say a 20% increase, it's not a 20% increase to your entire utility. It's just that electric portion. Right. And so, for example, if you had a $300 electric bill and your or a $300 utility bill and your electric was 100 of that, you'd be looking at a $20 increase, not a $60 increase if there were a 20% of your $300 bill. So I would just like to, not that the $20 increase in people's utilities isn't scary. It's scary, but I always like to put it in real dollars and kind of bring that one utility out to kind of, we're not talking about an increase of water or sewer.
If we did what Casey was somewhat suggesting, there we go. if we do what Casey was suggesting, are we just kicking the can down the road though? Because I mean, I want to help the citizens right now, to lower it. Because I mean, it affects all of us too, and but by not doing a good enough rate increase now, are we just going to punish ourselves next year to where the citizens are going to feel it in 6 months instead of now?
So it could. I mean, the thing is the reason why I like doing the 6% this year is it gives us a better chance to see what the effects of the PCA formula have done, because the PCA formula didn't have a right number in there, which was depleting our reserves, and that was fixed. So we haven't seen enough data to see how that is going to impact the reserve fund and the depletion that we've seen so far in the first half of this year. So I really think that I believe that we're doing our due diligence by not putting it on our citizens' shoulder, because I guess the alternative I would say is, okay, what if we don't do the 6%, we raise it 20%, and then next year we're twice as much as what we're showing here? Now, did we do our due diligence? Because now we're taking more money from our citizens. Yeah, we could lower the rate, but when has the city ever lowered the rate on anything? So, I mean, I feel like that if we can do a 6% reprieve for this year, get more data, look at what cuts, savings potential we could get, then we're at least showing the citizens we're doing everything we possibly can to not increase this utility on them.
So to get to that blue line, you'd be proposing a 14% increase rather than a 20, and withhold the franchise.
Well, it depends
fee.
on which number, and I think that's what we got to sift out in the finance committee, because Scott's number is a little bit different than Ben's, and Scott's showing about a 15% increase. Ben's showing a 20% increase.
Right.
So then that changes that, because if you pair that with the 6%, now you're talking under 10%.
Right.
If Scott's numbers accurate.
Well, Ben's the professional, so
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
have to default to him until.
Correct. I just want
Yours
to
are
make
more
sure.
colorful.
Yeah, I mean,
It's just my big.
if this is all we get for that, forget it.
I mean, my biggest concern is just if we
Yeah.
do the 6%, and then all of a sudden next year we have to do 30%. Now, what are we doing to our citizens then?
Well, I mean, you're.
I mean, I don't want to raise the rates.
Yeah, no,
I don't either. But I'm just saying, what if
that's
then next year all of a sudden
potentially likely. I mean, that very well could happen if our forecast hits what we think it'll do.
Mhm.
Then the 6% we didn't do, we're going to have to ask for that
Yeah.
on top of it. But so the way I think about that is, you're not ever taking any more money from the citizens as you need. You're just taking it in different chunks. So do you want to make the pain more gradual and do it in smaller steps, or do you keep it low and then you hit it? You hit them with the bigger one, hit us all. But if you do the numbers, it's the same amount of money coming out of your budget, your personal budget. It just makes it difficult to plan, right? If you instead of doing a 15, you do a 30. But it's very likely that could happen still.
In December, didn't we decide that we were going to raise the rates in July?
We went up by 10 no, we left it open.
already went
We wanted
by
to see what the
10.
10 did.
Yeah, we were waiting for deferred to
Well,
this meeting.
We talked about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
We knew we were going to have this meeting because
Here we are.
those lines weren't together. Expenses and revenue weren't meeting, so we knew we were going to have to.
Quick 6 months later.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's pretty fast.
So in July we wouldn't be raising it 10%. We'd be raising it 20 more percent, or we'd just be adding that 10% to what we've already added.
Be 20 more percent
20 more
based
percent.
on what we've already done.
And Ben,
Where we're already at right now.
does this have the municipal inflation index cooked in? And what number did we put in for that? What percent?
It'd be around 2%.
2%?
So that wouldn't be on top of it. It would
Right. Yeah, it's already in there. Well, I think that the one scenario you discussed, Casey, with the franchise fee or the admin fee, as Ben called it, you transfer the whole 6 in, but you don't transfer the whole 6 in. You could transfer 3 in. It's more about the health of the general fund reserve. And if I'm remembering right, that's the one that got us on our bond rating the last time. And I think that's the one that's the biggest deal. So, I mean, compared to when we had that bond rating compared to now, what's the health of the general fund reserve? Is it better? I know you said it was trending down, but
It's been better.
okay,
It's been better. It dropped a little bit last year only because of the legal issues, the legal fees that
right.
for suits that gone away.
Mm-hmm.
We don't expect that to be there again. We've been able to absorb that. That's the good thing.
Yeah.
They were one time, so
Bond dropping off,
Mhm.
bond payment.
Didn't we pause the transfers in with water last year too? So we should be
we
seeing.
paid them back too once.
Right.
Once it started ramping
Right.
back up, we paid them back.
Well,
So
that's
that
what-
makes me feel a little bit better.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think we could do it. I know it's not going to be fun and it's not what everybody wants to do, but
I think what's going to come down to is a conversation around. I mean, you heard in our budget meeting with the department heads, you heard what the police chief was asking for. You heard what the fire, so whatever we don't transfer over is going to impact everything they're asking for. So it will be a trade off between those,
That's right.
right? And that's what it'll be.
any other questions or discussions?
So I guess I'm still looking for some feedback. Are we, is the intent, I mean, we don't have to get within policy by the end of this year. Does the council want to try to do that? If we don't get within policy this year, it will be a downward trend year over year from 24, but we're not going out for a bond anytime soon. So I guess I'm looking for some feedback. So the reason I'm looking for feedback, we don't vote anything. I'm looking for some idea, some sort of consensus. So in the budget and finance, we could come back with a rate that would get us to kind of what we all decide we want to hit as the reserve. That makes sense? Without that, we're just kind of shooting in the dark.
So Casey, would you want to do the whole 6% of the franchise fee, or
Yeah, I mean, I think if the general fund can handle that,
We won't be able to handle it. I can tell you that right.
we'll discuss it in finance.
And you were too fast to answer.
He didn't even get the whole
Or that. I knew that was going to be
Yes,
his
I mean,
answer. Though.
yeah, I think
What's important is he kept his color didn't turn red. And
Right.
He stayed very calm.
Yeah, I've got two teenage daughters. Well, I guess they're college daughters.
so you're
Maybe
suggesting
well.
it would be take the 6% from that and then only increase the actual rate by what?
Well, it depends on where you
5%
want to end up
more?
with the reserve. That's the question.
I mean, or do instead of doing 20%, do we just do 10 more and then with the 6% get us to 16?
Yeah.
And
So
then does that? I mean,
Yeah, I think you got to see what the projections show, and then again, what the end of the year looks
yeah,
like.
let's work at it backwards. Let's pick where we want to end up. Let's pick a range because we can show you different rates. So if one of them is, we definitely want to make sure we get to the 15% reserve. That's one thing. We can show you a rate that would get us $100,000 below that, 200,000. So we could then pick based on what happens with, the trade-offs the council wants to make with the general fund, where we would need to be to hit, we just need to plan for where we want to end that cash reserve at.
You're
So
talking about this year.
I'm talking about ending this year. We'll put a plan together. The rates needed is going to be whatever it is to get there, and then if we decide to transfer any less out of the electric fund, that rate will go down, but we'll still get there. Does that make sense? So how about this? How about we come back with, this is what gets us to our fund policy rate wise, and then it's a whole, we can show 100,000, 200,000, 300. We can show different ranges below that. And then it would just become a conversation around Casey's idea on the general fund franchise fee, not transferring on where that actual rate ends up, but our ending targets won't change. Does that sound like a plan?
but our bottom line needs to be the red line.
Bottom line to be policy, yeah. Yeah.
Within a 3-year period.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
I'm
this year.
okay
So-
with us not being.
But you have to think about, I think to Ben's point, 15 is the low end of the policy.
Yeah.
And, I wouldn't have a problem with trying to get to the top end of the policy over a 3-year period.
Yeah, for sure.
Agree.
Because then it's just less risky, and then you've got more flexibility. And then, by the way, you can take if you have a year where power expenses really take a jump, you can eat back into that reserve
And
save your rate a little bit because it's already in there, right? So now you got room to play. When you're sitting at the bottom,
We don't.
you're just trying to stay at the, getting there. So you really lose flexibility. So I'd like to see us, to Ben's plan, get there into 27 at 25% of, of our operations in debt, and put a plan together to show where we're going to end 25, and work through that. And it'll change because the variables always change.
But we just need to make sure we keep the general fund.
Yeah, that'll be, yeah.
Two questions on that.
It may give you more, room if you look at that, hitting that minimum by the end of 26.
Yeah.
And if you did that, then the minimum being 600,000, or
Right. Or somewhere around.
it gives you more room to play with the general fund and the rate structure, because you could phase, and that's what we talked about, the finance committee, trying to phase some of that stuff in instead of hitting 25% right
Yeah.
away. Maybe it's 10, 15, and if you're looking at 18 months,
Yeah.
it gives you enough time to phase that in,
Yeah.
especially in the off years or the off.
So if I'm thinking about it right, it would shift some of the 25 increase into 26 or 27.
You level it out.
It might be more than 1% in 27, right? Because it's moving,
right.
It's moving to the right, but you still get there.
Yeah, it could. I mean,
It's
you're
spreading out.
looking at max of 5%,
Yeah.
maybe. Just say something
Yeah.
that's single digit that's not hard to swallow.
I think it would just be nice if we could come up with a plan. I mean, I know it's easier said than done, but to where we tell everyone, hey, it's going to go up here,
Yeah.
here, and then everyone knows
Yeah.
the next 2 years, this is exactly what,
Well,
obviously the best laid plans don't.
yeah. I
always
mean,
work.
there are assumptions on what everything costs. And I mean, the plan is a plan.
Mhm.
It's not going to go this way exactly. It'll be a little higher, a little lower. We'll have to adjust.
Well, and growth will change it. I mean, our growth rate changes it. Our cost of materials change it. Cost of energy changes it. I mean, there's so many different levers.
Mhm.
I mean, expenses, are obviously.
But if we can help them prepare for at least.
Right. So I think why we have these conversations, and it's so that they can hear what's going on. They know a rate increase is coming. We're discussing it's going to be from here to here,
Mhm.
And then come out, I think, with when we talk about 2026 final budget, then we need to lock it in and go, this is what we're going to do. And this is what we're going to plan to do in 27 if everything goes as planned. So yeah, ideally that's what we need to do.
Mhm.
So
We kind
quick,
of did that because we said we were going to raise it
Yep.
in January, and then we were going to possibly raise it again in July, so that they do know that something's coming, I think.
Yeah, but I
Just
mean,
don't know how much.
but if we could just even help them try to prepare further out, just
Yeah.
instead of just coming back every 6 months. And I know and saying, "Hey, nope, we're going to do it now this time." Nope. If we could just try to forecast it out for them so people can start budgeting. And I know everyone's has different situations and budgets change, but so I know I look a year out. So
That's the goal. I mean, that's what we shoot for, but it's a moving target.
so the general fund is funded by property taxes, the city's portion of property taxes, sales tax, and transfers in from utilities, right?
Purchase fees.
Right.
Yeah.
Those are the three things.
Essentially the big ones. Yeah. There's a myriad of other things, but yeah.
Right. So if we were to put a pause on the transfers into the general fund from the electric rate, so I guess the question that I have is sales tax. So what have sales tax look like actuals compared to forecasted for 2024?
Yeah. That's what I was pulling up.
I know a lot of people have been doing more Walmart deliveries, things like that, more Amazon. I know. So,
Costco even delivers now.
right. So I'm wondering if that,
Last year it went down. Last year sales tax went down. This year through April, it's gone up. I mean, it's not been double digits, but it's gone up.
I thought last time we looked at it as 7%
Yes.
trending.
If I remember correctly, I just did it this afternoon. It was 9%.
and what do we have plugged in for?
Held.
We had
Plugged in for projected.
5, I think, usually, don't we?
We have a 1%.
Oh,
It was decreasing last year, so
Oh.
who knows? Who knew what the tariffs or anything else going in the economy was going to do? But you guys are somewhat insulated from some of that. I mean, you got to drive to buy here,
Mhm.
or you're going to buy from outside, and then you still get the sales tax.
But sales tax are well exceeding what was plugged in for
Oh,
the
yeah, yeah,
forecast.
right
So
now.
that's something.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, I've got them right here.
So
City
Scott,
sales tax is at 8%. Well, hold on. That's monthly.
Just so we have a sense of the size of those numbers, Ben, what are we talking annual 20 sales tax?
Increases.
No, just total.
How much money does 8% mean?
What hits?
So city sales tax in the general fund's around 330,000, 340,000. And the
We would have forecasted what, 50?
county side is 750,000.
yeah, I was gonna say we collect over $1 million just in sales tax.
Yeah. So the city side on the general fund, we just left it flat, 330.
Okay.
And it's trending at 7% up right now. That's through May. That's on the city side. On the county side, it's trending up 8%. By this time last year, we had only had 1 month that was positive last year. So it's headed in the right direction.
Right.
And this is what you're used to,
Yeah.
back prior to COVID.
Right.
Then as you get more houses built, obviously
Sure.
it adds on.
Yeah.
I mean, the 26 budget right now, we got Glenn and I got to argue about what that's going to be plugged in, but that's also going to answer some of what your question is. Right. How much can we defer?
Yeah. Both have to be. Had a
That's why the reason we're
pretty
having this now, so we can
Yeah.
encompass it in the budget. We can plug it in scenarios in the budget. I mean, I think there's still going to be an increase at some level. To your
Sure.
point, Jay, there'll be an increase at some level July-ish because we'll have time to come back and talk about it before we put an ordinance in place. But then the big question is going to be what that number is, and then what the rest of the numbers for the rest of the year is.
Mm-hmm.
How much can we push into 26 and have a reasonable increase in January 26? Reasonable not being 20%.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? All right.
See, no red face.
Everyone was very pleasant.
We'll wait till next Friday.
Thanks to everyone that was working on this. Thank you.
We all have to come up with a decision, so we're just trying to give you enough information that you can make the best decision you possibly can. So,
All right.
thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.